Okay, hi everyone. So I'm here with Jim Rothblatt again for our second interview, kind of about Vietnam and his experience. Hi Jim, how are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm good. Looking forward to this.
Okay, good. So since our last interview, I've been, reading I read a book called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and I saw a movie called The Last Full Measure. And I know you're aware of both. Just what are your thoughts? I mean, is it really based on experience? Is this some of the stuff that you experienced in Vietnam?
Well, I think I mentioned to you in an email that the things they carried would have been the book that if I could write, that I would like to have written. In fact, I had an opportunity to tell that directly to Tim O'Brien once. But even though he calls it fiction, and I believe in a lot of ways that it is fiction. But one of the chapters in there is how to tell a true war story, and that's what he does with that book. It's
Okay.
absolutely
Okay.
nails it.
What about, in The Last Full Measure, there was a story of that medic from the Air Force who decides to stay with some of the grunts, I guess, the army guys,
Right.
and he ends up getting killed, and then it's all about people trying to work on his behalf to get the Medal of Honor. I mean, is that the bureaucracy? I don't know if you were involved with any medal kind of stuff, but
Well, if you're asking about the medals part of it, yes, I think that's kind of an interesting piece. It was much easier for officers to get medals or dead people to get medals. He was dead, but the Medal of Honor is in a unique place. I mean, it takes a congressional approval to get that. And I watched the movie. I wasn't familiar with the story before the movie, but if there's anyone that deserved the Medal of Honor, I'd say that he was down for it based upon what I saw in the film. And yes, there is it, the whole deal with medals in the military is a whole interesting thing. It's there is a lot of politicking to it, and it, it's just about a whole lot of things. I could tell you a couple of different stories about it in my personal experience
yeah,
with
please.
medals, but I saw in some of the times that I was in combat situations, I saw people do things that were absolutely deserving of a medal. And I knew them, I lived with them, but because of the circumstances, and even though I was witness to it, I couldn't say who they were. I was too stressed out. For them, it was just another day. They got no medal. Uh, I mean, and then I'm aware of people that got medals, they got killed. The write-ups about what they did wasn't necessarily what happened, but I think it makes the families feel better. When you send their kid home in a box and he's got a medal and a purple heart pinned to his chest somehow. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you about it, but it's a mixed bag. Officers needed them. They wanted to move up the ladder. The rest of us, I don't know. I don't. People, I got a medal for two things, one medal for two things that I didn't even do. I mean, I was awarded a medal by the South Vietnamese Army. Do you want to hear this? I mean, you
Yeah,
asked
no,
the
please.
question.
Yeah, it's about stories, so I want to hear this.
Okay, so yeah, so our unit worked with supposedly training South Vietnamese Army Rangers from time to time. We'd be paired up with them. Um, so once I get called out of the field into the major's office, a battalion executive officer, and he tells me I'm going to get a medal that from the South Vietnamese government, that I am not to turn it down. It's a direct order that I'm going to get this medal. And then I'm going to get an overnight pass afterwards before I return to the field. So I wound up, along with a group of other guys, we wound up in the South Vietnamese palace, the presidential palace on the parade grounds. We stood in a platoon formation, and we had medals pinned on our chest by South Vietnamese officers. And then we went into the palace and they served us hors d'oeuvres and champagne. And then I never did get the pass before the effects of the champagne had even worn off. I was back in the field. But I had occasion to read a translation of what it was that I received the medal for. It was a South Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, bronze is what I got. So what I got the medal for was going to a South Vietnamese ranger that ultimately died. Uh, and then a second one was on another day to going to try to save a South Vietnamese Army Ranger who also died. And the descriptions of both the events were pretty accurate, except they represented me going to Americans, not South Vietnamese soldiers. So I didn't get a medal for those from the Americans, but I got a Cross of Gallantry from the South Vietnamese government for trying to save two South Vietnamese soldiers that I never saw. It never happened.
Oh my gosh.
So what is that? But I'm kind of proud of the medal because it was actually about stuff that happened, sort of.
Can you, did you bring home anything else from Vietnam? I mean, from the war, did soldiers typically, did you take, I don't know, souvenirs? I don't know what else to call them. I mean, home or?
Well, I know quite a few people that took souvenirs home, including automatic weapons and things, you know.
Oh.
So no, the only thing I really brought home was the stuff the Army gave me. You know, like I've got my dog tags. I've got the ribbons and the medals that they gave me. I've got a cigarette lighter. They issued us all cigarette lighters because smoking is good for troops in the field. But that's about it. But yeah, no, I know quite a few people have brought stuff back.
Was there, so, I was thinking again of the movie, and also of Pat Tillman, who I read a book about, but did you find there's a lot of friendly fire kind of casualties that happened?
Oh, my best friend was killed by friendly fire
It was.
from our company. So yes, the friendly fire was a serious issue. I believe it is true in any war,
Well,
no matter what side you're on.
so what happened to your friend?
In fact, the second person I was with who died, was a guy by the name, happened early. It happened on Valentine's Day, in fact, in 1967. I didn't know it was Valentine's Day at the time, but
Of course.
anyway, it was a guy named James Berard, and he was a friend, and he got killed. And up until just a couple of years ago, I was sure he got killed by a Viet Cong. The two guys that were closest to him said so. In fact, one of the guys that was with him was wounded by the Viet Cong, and Viet Cong were killed at the time. But a couple of years ago, I got into contact with the guy that was our machine gunner with that squad. And for all these years, he's been in therapy and depressed and feeling horrible because he believes he killed Berard. Berard, when the shooting started, James Berard, ran in front of his fire. So there's three people that were witness to James Berard's death. Two swear up and down it was the Viet Cong, and one swears that he did it, and he's never gotten over it.
Well, so what happened to your best friend?
Oh, I was with the company perimeter. We were in our foxholes, and his platoon was out patrolling, daytime patrol. And from the opposite side of the perimeter I was on, I'm listening on the radio. They spotted some Viet Cong in a tree line just outside our perimeter. So they asked for permission to fire. So it turns out that the patrol, that my friend, his name was Edward Clinton Miller. He died on July 2nd, 1967. His patrol was on the other side of that wood line. So I listened on the radio where they called over to that platoon and said, get down, we're going to be firing in your direction. Well, it turns out the squad he was in never got the word. So when our perimeter opened up into the tree line, he was killed instantly by fire from our own company. If I'd been on that side of the perimeter, I might have shot him myself.
And how does the Army or the military kind of report those things to families then? I mean, do they say?
He's listed as he is listed. Both of them, of course, are listed as killed in action by enemy small arms fire.
Tell me, so that was a really painful thing for you, it seems like.
I never quite got. It's what you know. All of those are things that I never quite got over. I'm better now than ever. I mean, I can talk about them and I can do interviews with people, or I don't even know where the interview's going. And so, but I think it's important. It's small stuff compared to all the stories that are out there, but it's my story and it's the one that I live with.
And it seems like, by saying their names, you somehow keep them alive too, which I think is really important as well.
Yeah, I their dates of their deaths are stuck in my brain because I've done a lot of thinking about it, a lot of research about it, and that's how I can kind of comment on it with some level of expertise. Even though there's people that were with me that have slightly different takes on all this stuff, and I'm sure all of us could pass lie detector tests, even though the stories don't always match up.
Right. Jim, so earlier in our conversation, we were talking a little about medals, and you said, you saw people in the field doing things, but they didn't earn medals. It was just, what they had to do. So do you have memories of some of those things that people would just do where, maybe they should have gotten a medal?
Well, the one that stands out the most to me, I got such a clear picture of it in my head because it happened under such traumatic circumstances, is it was in the longest firefight I was ever in, which lasted about 6 hours. Uh, and kind of at the heart of it, I was running across this rice paddy, and there was a guy who now I know what his name is, who it was. His name is Bill Kilpatrick. He's a retired plumber living in Florida. But at the time, we were under heavy fire, and Kilpatrick was prone in front of a dike with a Chicom Claymore mine in front of him. That's a communist Claymore mine. It was kind of like a big pie plate like this. And Kilpatrick had his head up. So like where my hands are, that would be like where the Claymore mine is to me. And he had a machete and he was chopping the wire that was going to it. Now, it's obvious to me that maybe the person that was supposed to detonate that mine was either dead or that there was a malfunction. Because if that thing had gone off, it would have taken all of us out of the paddy. So there was no reason it hadn't gone off yet. But to see Kilpatrick face to face with that thing, chopping at it, I mean, I can't imagine me being in that position. I mean, it seems like I would have rolled out of the way or ran like hell or been screaming. I don't know.
How heavy were those claymores?
Well, I'd never picked one up, one of the Chinese ones. Ours were smaller, and a lot of the guys had to carry them. I know they talked about the dimensions and the weight and the things they carried.
Yeah, it didn't sound like they were really big, it sounded like very small, but they were very powerful.
Well, I would guess they were maybe about 8 inches by 10 or something like that, kind of curved. Ours were. And all that stuff was heavy. All the ammunition, the powder, the explosives, it's all heavy. It's like going to the gym. You know, it's concentrated weight. Bullets, the weapons, it's all heavy.
So how much, I mean, how much did a pack weigh then? I mean, or how much extra weight would someone carry? Is it 50 pounds or?
Well, it varied depending on what your job was. Like the radio man, God, they had a 25-pound radio on their back,
Yeah.
it, not counting anything else. Then you put in extra batteries, you put the ammunition they have to carry, their food, and it's like, as a medic, where other people carried, I only carried the amount of ammunition and stuff that I wanted to carry. I wasn't obligated. I carried an M16 and 220 rounds of ammunition and one hand grenade, fragment grenade. So that was all the armament I carried, which was less than probably anyone else in the whole platoon. And the thing that I had to carry was my medical kit, which is just bandages and scissors. So it's the lightest thing out there. So I was embarrassed to let any of the line guys even pick up my pack, because some of these guys, if we'd load on trucks or something, and they'd get on the truck and people would hand up their packs, I could barely lift some of the packs these guys walked around with all day. I can't even guess how much. They were like god awful heavy. The grenadiers, each of those little grenades they carried weighed about a pound, I think. I can't, plus all the other stuff, entrenching tools and grenades and smoke grenades and just on and on. Just I know the only people who carried a pack as light as me were the officers.
Right. But how did,
Everyone else's was damn heavy.
so how, I mean,
Though when you patrol, it's a different deal. You
yeah,
leave your heavy pack, and then you just have your water, your food, and your ammo and weapons and stuff.
okay. But if you're,
So
so
that
just, go ahead.
well, then you wouldn't have a lot of the extras. You wouldn't take a claymore mine out on patrol, or an
Right.
entrenching tool. Or things you got to leave behind.
But if you're, is the correct terminology humping? You're
Yeah,
walking.
that was the term we use. Yeah,
Okay. So
humping the field.
but if you're doing that and your pack is 70 to 80 pounds, maybe more, and it's the summer, so it's really humid and it's raining. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, I just can't, I can't imagine myself doing anything like that.
Well, I can't imagine that I actually did it, and it was painful. But I look at these new guys, like in the Iraq and Afghani wars, and they got all this, bulletproof vests and stuff on their legs, and all that same weight, and everyone's got a radio, and they're smaller, but I think they carry way more than we did, just to stand up. I mean, God, these guys, they're so loaded down, I can't get over it. Our bulletproof vest was our shirt.
Yeah, I can't imagine being in those kinds of conditions. And then having the wherewithal to actually, be in battle and all that as well. I don't know. Okay, so let's go on to, you went back to Vietnam in what year then?
Summer of 2000.
Okay, so that was what, when did you leave originally? You were 67, was it? 66?
Yeah, I was there for most of 1967.
So,
December 66 to late November 67.
okay, so now it's 2000, you're in your early 50s. You went with one of your daughters, or
Yeah,
your
my one daughter, she
one.
turned 18 while we were
Yeah.
there.
And why, I mean, why did you want to go back with her? And why did you want to go back?
Well, I've always been fascinated with going back, and because it was so strong in my head. But I And I once got actually invited to go back by an organization that was sending some Vietnam vets back, but I just started a new job in the schools and I couldn't take off. And then I kind of had this resistance since the government sent me once for free. I had this thing, I don't want to pay to go back. I want someone that, want it to be a freebie. So in the year 2000, one of the guys that I worked with, a friend of mine, Tim Ryan, teacher at Palm Desert High School, he was going, he had been in the Peace Corps while I was in Vietnam. So he was going to a friend of his from the Peace Corps to a 50th birthday party to one of his friends in Thailand and asked if I wanted to join him and his wife and their son on a trip back, and that we'd do a side trip to Vietnam. So it sounded like a good deal. So I did.
So, I mean, so tell me about it though. What did it feel like when you went back and probably saw some of the spaces, the places where you actually were in battle and
Yeah, I tried to go to that exact spot where I saw the guy with the claymore that I just
yeah.
described, but
Oh,
I didn't find it. But anyway, so yeah, so we flew over. I was with my daughter. So we first night we spent in Bangkok, and then the next morning we left for Vietnam. And I was actually nervous about actually doing it. And so I, we went to the hotel. And in fact, being in the traffic when we first got out the airport, it's just this crazy traffic in Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City. It was wild. It was like looking out the window and seeing all this stuff. And anyway, we went to the hotel, all jet lagged and all. And so that night I couldn't sleep. I'm like pacing, going crazy. And in the hotel we were at, um, they had the door locked from the inside, and there was a guy sleeping in the lobby, and his job was to unlock the door if he wanted to go out. So I'm like up all night, pacing, going crazy. Didn't want to wake him up, and all that stuff. So finally, I can't stand it anymore. So early that next morning, I woke him up. He opened the door, and I went out, and across the street was a park, and there were all kinds of people in the park exercising, jogging, walking, doing Tai Chi, um, hack and sack. I mean, it was alive with stuff. I mean, the sun isn't even up yet. And so I just started walking around the park in the circle of the people, and it was really pleasant. The sun comes up, and then got back on the sidewalk, and this little girl comes up to me. She's maybe, who knows, maybe 8 years old, saying, "You buy postcards?" And as soon as she said that, just this little smile on her face, and it's like I was back. And the beauty of it was, it's like you don't see someone for, see, I was there in 67, so you don't see someone for 33 years. And then you go back and you can kind of tell it's the same person, but they're different. It was different. It was like, from that moment on, I was as at home as anywhere I've ever been, and just enjoyed 8 days of wonderful.
that's really interesting, Jim, that you felt like you were at home. I wonder but what do you think caused that though? I mean, here's a place where, you were in a war, many friends were killed, but yet you felt like it was home. I mean, why was that?
Well, the people were, it was like, well, I can tell you real easily. It was the, it was the welcome home I never got at home. Every, everywhere I went for 8 days, all day long, Vietnamese men, about my own age, would stop me and ask me where I was from and if I'd ever been there before. And as soon as I said 1967, it was like we were best friends. I had drinks, I had tea, I had coffee, I had, you know, it's like I tell you, we started off, no one's really interested. these people were, and what they say, and over half the population at that time had been born after all of the war had been over.
Yeah.
So for most of the people in the country, that was history.
Yeah.
So I'm one of the old guys, that they don't even talk to, that they have no interest in talking to. But everywhere we went, there were like about it on the main road that did a little bit of traveling, about every 20 kilometers, there'd be a monument to the Viet Cong that died, and they'd had an incense burning there. I mean, they kept it kind of alive. So it was a wonderful reception that I got every day. I mean, they bought my daughter stuff, they just, sometimes they couldn't, and they wanted to speak English because it's the language of commerce. And they told me stories about what it was like for them there. And, I mean, it was I emailed back and forth with some after I got home. I mean,
Did you feel
I
any,
can't tell you anything like, go ahead, I'm sorry.
did you feel any antagonism though from anyone? Did anyone say, hey, you stupid American, blah, blah, blah?
No, the closest that ever came, I was on this beautiful beach in the Trang. I mean, it's like, tropical beach, looking out at islands out there, coconut palms swaying in the breeze, and people would come along and try to sell me stuff. But, all of them understood no, but then they would stop and chat because they wanted to speak English. And they're all multilingual because Americans were the least of their tourists. I mean, they got French and German and Norwegian and Chinese. And I mean, God, it was all these people were amazing friggin' people. Just anyway. So this one guy, he's wearing he's barefoot, but he's got like a suit on and a briefcase. And comes walking by. I'd been there a couple of days already. And so people, small town stuff, so they kind of know who you are after a while. So he stops and sits down next to me. I'm sitting on a blanket or something, just enjoying the view. And he sits next to me, and I'm waiting to see what he has to sell. And they're just quiet for a while. And then he says, I've been to your country. And I've been to England too. He says, my he goes, my father was a cyclo driver, and my father was a farmer, and my father was this, and my father was that, and he's dead. And he goes, my mother, only has one leg. He goes, in the south part of Vietnam, people will be friendly with you. In the north part of Vietnam, not so much. He says, but it's okay now. And so, and he told me the reason he'd been to America and to England is because he was part of the group where they're trying to find where the remains of the relatives that were killed, America was trying to get our remains back. So they wanted us to do the same thing for them. Where'd you bury my relatives, So he had been part of that contingent going to America. And anyway, so he just says, but it's okay now. And he puts his hand on mine. And we just sat there like that. I thought he was going to cry, but he didn't. And then he just said, but it's okay now. And he got up and walked off. But that was the closest thing to anything negative I heard. And it was not negative at all. It was like, had me about ready to cry.
It's such a heartfelt story.
And then a number of times, the guys would tell me, they go, yeah, we had two choices. We could join the government forces and fight our family, or we could join the Viet Cong and fight against our family, which is pretty rough.
Yeah, it's really tough. There was.
And my last day in the Trang on the beach, they had this big, beautiful monument, to the memorial to the Viet Cong. So I knew I was going to be leaving that day. So I went and bought a big old handful of josh sticks, incense sticks, and went down to the memorial and put them in there. And I was trying to light them but there was a breeze blowing and I couldn't keep the lighter lit. And this Vietnamese man comes walking over, and with my hands, we cup our hands together so I could light it. Not a word spoken, but just, I mean, I don't, it was spiritual.
Yeah.
But I'm the kind of guy that can do that stuff. I mean, I look for that kind of thing. There's other people go over there and they're freaking out all over the place.
Yeah. That's amazing. There was, in thinking about the things they carried, there was one of the stories, I can't remember the title, was about when O'Brien goes back to Vietnam with his daughter. And he goes to a place where they were kind of just waiting, camping out, but it was a shit field, actually. And
Right.
one of the guys, one of his friends ended up getting shot, and then maybe he drowned. They couldn't find him, but they go
He was
back,
buried in the shit field. Yeah.
they find his body. But I remember him saying when he went back, I was looking at these farmers who were kind of looking at us. And I think he was wondering, do they have any recollection? What do they think about this, white guy over in this field when it wasn't that, later on, of course. So did you have any of the places that you visited where, I don't know, you really felt something strong, your remembrances, or you saw Vietnamese kind of looking at you, kind of maybe wondering what you were doing there?
No, it was, like I said, it was like the welcome home that every Vietnam vet had been looking for, whether they knew they were looking for it or not. I mean, I don't, I don't know how many people would this from vets I work with that would actually be receptive to it. They might be so uptight that they don't see it or feel it. But from many of the stories I've heard from guys that have gone back, it was pretty similar to mine. But no, it was, I couldn't, it like cleansed me. It was like, they celebrate the 4th of July in Saigon. What? They got Uncle Sam and the fireworks. And what is that? And it's a communist country. I mean, there's 3 Vietnams really, North, Middle, and South, and they all have their own flavor. But in the South, the people still, while I was there, it was 20 years ago, we're still calling it Saigon, even though it's been Ho Chi Minh City since 1975.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the park that I walked in, that was across the street from the hotel, big, beautiful park. The sidewalks and grassy areas. No one was on the grass. Everyone was always on the sidewalks. I mean, what kind of park do you not go on the grass? So I finally asked someone, I go, look around and no one's on the grass. And they said that it used to be a cemetery for important South Vietnamese. But when the North Vietnamese took over, they dug all the bodies up and moved them and turned it into a park. And so in reverence, they don't walk on the grass. It's a cement park surrounded by with cemetery in there. That's not a named cemetery. I wouldn't know if I hadn't asked.
Unbelievable. So okay, but you also, when you came home, Jim, one of the things that you did was you helped others who had been in the war. I mean, through therapy. What are some of those stories, and why? I mean, why did you end up doing that?
It wasn't until 17 years later that I actually got into that. But it started with the dedication of the statues at the National Memorial in Washington, D.C. I went to that. There were 100,000 Vietnam vets in town, supposedly. I hung out with them. I spent a lot of hours hanging out at the National Memorial, seeing all the tears that were still left over. And had the thought, well, I'm a counselor and I'm a Vietnam vet, and there's all this pain still left over. And I really had wanted to talk to other Vietnam vets. I didn't really necessarily want to be a counselor, but when I went down to the VA, the vet center in Riverside at the time, and volunteered, or I to work with them, and I wound up being turning into a vet counselor, which my intention was just to be a vet patient, but that didn't come till later. But I did that for 12 years, and I quit that in 1996, and that's when I did become a vet patient in the same system, basically, that I'd been a counselor in. And so I did that on and off for a number of years. So I met vets on both sides of it. And when I was doing the counseling, I met World War II vets, Korean vets, mostly Vietnam era vets. So, and their families and wives and all that kind of stuff. So, I had many stories. Uh, Part of the counseling that I did toward the end, I did small group counseling, PTSD therapy groups. And I had one that met every Thursday night for 3 years. No one wanted to end it. And I'm still in contact with some of those guys. Some of them have died, but some of them still call me. In fact, and one just left me a message. I'm sending you a check for $50 so you can buy boots for your grandkid.
Oh,
My grandkid needs boots, but he didn't give me a choice, it was a message on my phone, so now I got to pick out boots.
what were some of those stories? Do you remember like any of the World War II stories, or I mean, just any of the stories that people told?
I'll give you, well, I had favorites, so I could give you, one was this old Sergeant Mack. He retired. He had been in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And currently, when he'd come in for counseling, he was working at 29 Palms. He had a civilian job, but he was working out there, and he'd been like a sergeant major in the Army when he retired. It's a pretty highest NCO rank. And his grandson and his wife suggested that he go in for counseling because he would say stuff. What brought him, he gave me an example of why they felt that he had a problem. Like he was in an auto parts store and there was a line and he was in front of the clerk, and the clerk was on the phone talking to someone. And like the conversation wasn't ending. So being his military experience kicked in and he said something like, if you don't put that motherfucking phone down, I'm going to jump over this counter and kick your, that kind of stuff, which for some reason, and shouting it like a DI might. So, which the civilian world isn't really used to that kind of stuff, but that was, he'd been in like for 40 years, so he was going in at the request of his grandson, who was an adult, and his wife, because they were tired of him embarrassing them for the kind of stuff that you and I put up with every single day. He had no patience.
Right.
So it was a lesson in language that we had, how he could express himself in more socially acceptable terms. It was pretty easy working with him. He was a smart guy. But he told me two stories that stand out. One, he was in the second landing. I can't remember which beach, but in Normandy, the invasion of Normandy. And so he was brand new. He was in, and he said they got on the beach and his platoon leader had been killed. His platoon sergeant had been killed. And he said, these guys that I was with were the dumbest people I'd ever been with in my life. No one was shooting. So here he is. He says, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I know that you're supposed to shoot back. So that was kind of his version of the Normandy invasion. And then I asked him, okay, you'd been in the Army all those years. I go, was there any peak moment for you, that really stands out as the most important thing that you'd ever done? And so the story he tells, he was stationed in Germany, not during the war, this is peacetime, and he was working in transportation. And it was cold and snowing, and they were in a large convoy. It was stuck. And so he's finally can't figure out what's going on. So he walks up to the front of the convoy, and it was the commanding general of all troops in Europe's Jeep was stalled. And there's generals standing there with the driver, and they're looking under the hood. And so he says, so he took his helmet off, and he said he cracked it against the carburetor. And then he told the driver, now start it up. And the guy gets in, and the Jeep started right up, and the convoy moved off. That was his peak moment. 3 wars, all that time in the service. So I mean, and so that's one story. Another story, and it kind of goes back to I think I watched an interview you did with someone that had been in special forces or special ops.
Woody.
So this guy had been in special ops, special forces, working with the Montagnards in Vietnam. This was in one of the first groups I was ever in. And this guy was just torn up, kind of like my buddy, the friendly fire, kind of that kind of depression, upset, because he'd lived with the Montagnards. He wore bracelets that they'd given him as they initiated him into the tribe. And when the US pulled out of Vietnam, he left them all behind, never to be, where we could ever have contact with them again, to know that turned out. And the Vietnamese were ruthless with them because they had sided with the Americans. So he just felt this, for abandoning the Montagnards. He was just, I don't know if the guy ever got over it ever. I mean, what do you do with that guy?
Right.
The kind of guilt that he felt and abandonment, and I mean, he knew him from babies up.
Were you able to help people? I mean, I don't know. Do you ever get through PTSD, or you just learn?
Yeah, you learn to love it. It's kind of that my take. That was the model I worked on. It's like, well, if it hadn't affected you in that way, then you're screwed up.
Right.
No normal person, So, and it does pays honor to the people, and what it came down to me is that it's grief is what it is in my world of being a therapist. I described it as grief. You did not live up to being the person that you'd always hoped you'd be. You had your chance, and you found out that you're less than you hoped you would be. That you're not only grieving the loss that you saw over there with friends and all that stuff, but you've lost yourself. And so, and I would finally got to the point where working with people, and my line would be, now I'd like you to share the story with me the day that Santa Claus died, where it's kind of like everything you ever believed about yourself and the world you live in. And tell me, and so almost every vet has a point, that a story comes to mind when I would ask that question. And then we tear that apart and work from that.
So you're still in contact with people that you served with, or
some that I served with, and some that I was a therapist with.
That you're a therapist with, yeah. And so when you talk to the people that you serve with, or even the people that you served, I mean, do you talk about Vietnam at all, or is it?
Well, some, yes, but it's not. It's in a way, in a context that fits in with today. Most of it, in terms of the people that I'm in contact with, and I'm in contact with people that I didn't serve with and weren't my clients, because they were in the same unit, and I met them through message boards. and we've been in contact. So, and those are the guys that I'm mostly in contact with, and most of what we talk about is politics,
Yeah.
current politics, but as influenced by what we experienced in Vietnam. Like my line, one of my lines that I use for myself is everything I learned that's worth anything I learned in Vietnam. And that's pretty much true. Like people say I'm stuck in the 60s. I'm stuck in the 60s. I'm stuck in the early 70s. And the movie that fits for that is Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
That was my time period. And I relate to that completely. That's the best Hollywood movie that, for me, that I connect with, and that movie kind of shows how Vietnam can impact you today.
Well,
Like Lieutenant Dan represented every vet I ever worked with.
Yeah.
If you want to know what the vets, my version of what the vets I work with, they're all Lieutenant Dan.
Yeah.
Sit on then that one scene where he's on the shrimp boat on top of the mast in the storm, screaming at God that you can't kill me. Beautiful. I mean, it's.
Well, in a large sense, I think if you look at the history of the 20th century, after World War II, right, a lot of prosperity and such in the US. I mean, there was Korea, of course, but this was a country really on the rise, right? I mean, Kennedy had been elected, a lot of hope, and then Vietnam came, and it was just, probably other people have said it, but it was a loss of innocence, with Vietnam. And I mean, 68, the other Kennedy killed, Martin Luther King killed. So I think it still has a huge impact on, this country, whether people understand that or not.
Well, it seems clear to me that it has, but to try to describe it to a younger generation, unless they're interested in history and toughen out the details, it's like, but I mean, you just even with Trump when he was, his draft deferments were an issue. And then if you go back to when Kerry was running for president, he didn't earn his Purple Hearts. He wasn't deep enough in it. It's like, so I don't know. And Clinton and his deferments, and McCain with his service. I mean, it's like you make it what you will. I mean, it's like how people read the Bible. It's like you can pull out of it whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. All right, well, we're going to end today's interview. Are there any final thoughts you have about anything that we've spoken about today?
Not really. I just really appreciate you doing this. I'm wondering what happens. I mean, can I get a copy of these tapes, or how does that work? And I appreciate you're doing it. I mean, like I say, just to have someone that's actually interested in. And I'm at a point in my life where I believe this stuff is important, and I'd like to just throw it out into the ether, and that's what I feel like I'm doing here. And thanks to you.
Yeah, but we don't want to lose these stories. I mean, I think it's really important to hear from the people that actually experienced this stuff.
And if you're cool with it, I could send you other book recommendations and stuff. But of course, you got to know that it's coming from my bias, and there's a million different things out there. So as I send you titles, it's my version of trying to influence you.
I like your bias, Jim.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.